Greetings everyone, I'm Adam Haritan. Welcome to the beautiful woods of western Pennsylvania. Today I have morel mushrooms on my mind. So much so that I want to talk about them exclusively in this video. Now you might be thinking to yourself, what is wrong with this guy? Why in the world is he out there talking about morels when it's obviously winter, there are several inches of snow on the ground, temperatures look like they're in the teens, and he looks like he's freezing his butt off? Well, let me tell you, I am freezing my butt off. But just because things are like this today doesn't mean they're going to be like this forever. And in just a few short months, things will be much different, temperatures will warm up, and morels will certainly return. The question is, can we do anything now, in advance, over the next several weeks, to prepare and be ready for what is to come? And the answer is undoubtedly yes. There are so many things we can do now and over the next several weeks to improve our chances of finding morels this upcoming season. I like to think of it like I think of deer hunting. Perhaps you are a deer hunter, perhaps you know a deer hunter, perhaps you know something about serious deer hunters. And if you know anything about serious deer hunters, you know that they don't typically wait until opening day to begin their hunt. They don't wait until the week in advance to begin their hunt. Sometimes they're out there months in advance, or sometimes they're out there all year long. Now, I'm not saying serious deer hunters are out there in the off season with their bows and firearms looking for deer, because that would be illegal. But they're taking advantage of every opportunity in the woods to scout the land, to read the land, to explore new properties, to look for sign, to look for deer, and to ask themselves the all-important question, whether explicitly or implicitly, is this an area I would want to come back to later because I'm likely to find deer here during deer season? We can approach morel mushroom hunting very similarly to deer hunting, in the sense that we don't have to wait until March or April when conditions are much better. We don't have to wait until we start seeing other people finding morels for us to begin our search for morels. We can be out there in January and February. We could be out here in the autumn season. We could be out here in the summer season, exploring new properties and taking advantage of every opportunity in the woods to read the landscape and ask ourselves the all-important question: is this an area I would want to come back to later because I'm likely to find morels here? That's a really good question to ask. And every time we attempt to answer that question, even if we can't answer it that well, as long as we attempt to answer it to the best of our ability, we improve our ecological literacy. And when we improve our ecological literacy, we can't help but become better mushroom hunters. Now, I want to say something very briefly about predictions. A lot of people want to know, how's the morel season going to unfold this spring? Can we say anything about it based on what's happening right now? Now, the new age side of me would say everything's connected, so of course what's happening right now will have some effect on the upcoming morel season. But as far as what we humans can say about it, I'm not quite sure. I think when people make successful predictions about the morel season, they're making these predictions the week before the season or 2 weeks before the season, or at least closer to morel season, or even during the season, when they're analyzing weather patterns and they're looking at rainfall and they're looking at temperatures. Because if it's really rainy, if there's a lot of rainfall and temperatures are mild and warm, it's easy to say the morels will be prolific that year. If it's very dry and it's very cold, it's easy to say you're not going to see many morels. Now, having said that, be assured that no matter what's happening, morels will certainly return somewhere in the general area in which they usually appear. No matter what's happening in the world, no matter what's happening in your personal life, no matter who's president of the United States, they will return in the areas in which they typically appear. Maybe not so prolifically, but at least a few will appear in that general area. The question is, will you be there when they appear? Now, something that I really encourage you to do is to analyze previous year's results. How did you do last year? How did you do the year before that? And I'm not saying you have to create charts and graphs and look at them intently or create complex statistical formulas to analyze previous year's results, but just spend a few moments and go over last year's successes. How well did you do last year? How well did you do the year before? And why did you do well in those years? Or perhaps more importantly, what mistakes did you make last year? What could you have improved? I know it sounds cliche, but we often learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. And if you analyze these mistakes and you change a few things, maybe one or two things, you'll probably improve your chances of finding morels this year. Now, another thing I recommend that you do if you really want to improve your chances of finding morels, if you just want to become a better all-around naturalist, is something that I recommended earlier when I was talking about hunting deer, and that is to explore lots of ecosystems and get to learn ecosystems and just explore new properties and new places. If you typically hang out in one certain park, well, go to a different park and learn the ecosystems in that park, because a park isn't just one single ecosystem typically. You might have wetlands in there, you might have uplands, you might have bottomlands, you might have other ecosystems in there as well. When you learn about morel mushroom hunting and you start to make connections between morels and trees and why morels are growing in certain areas, you typically see that morels grow in certain kinds of ecosystems, generally. Not always, but generalizations can be made. So where I live in Western Pennsylvania, I often find morels in bottomland areas, fertile floodplains, the slopes leading down into floodplains, old homesteads where fruit orchards, specifically apple orchards, have been planted. Those are the kinds of ecosystems that I'm exploring. And whenever you go to a new park, let's say McConnell's Mill State Park, you've never been there before, and you go to a specific part of that park, don't just think of it as McConnell's Mill State Park, because that doesn't really tell you anything about the land. Learn to see the mature hemlock, beech, northern red oak ecosystem that's in there. If you go to a place called Bear Meadows Natural Area, you've never been there before, but you're exploring and you come across a specific part of it, don't just think of the whole thing as Bear Meadows Natural Area. Think of it as a high elevation black spruce wetland. The more specific you are with your ecosystem analyses, the better able you will be to determine whether or not certain organisms, including morels, are likely to grow in such areas. Now, something you can do right now, all the way up until morel season, even during morel season, and after morel season, all the way up until the following year's morel season, is to learn tree identification. Become an excellent identifier of trees, because morels associate typically with certain trees. Now, there's a reason I talked about ecosystems first before trees, and that's because trees grow in certain ecosystems. And sometimes it's easier actually just to go into an ecosystem expecting to find trees there, rather than randomly walking around hoping to find the trees. But learning trees can help you find morels and can also help you identify certain ecosystems. So what trees associate with which morels? Well, it all depends on where you live. I live in Western Pennsylvania, so the mid-Atlantic, northeastern United States, Appalachian region. Typically, I'm looking for elms, American elm, slippery elm. I'm looking for tulip trees. I'm looking for ash trees, both white ash and green ash. I'm looking for apple trees as well. I'm looking for sycamore trees and some other trees as well. Something that all these trees have in common is that they typically grow in fertile areas. Not all these trees do, but a lot of them do. And a lot of those trees that I mentioned typically grow in bottomland areas or areas next to streams or the slopes leading down into streams. Learning to identify trees is essential if you want to become a better naturalist, if you want to develop ecological literacy, and if you want to become a better mushroom hunter. And the good news is that you still have time to learn how to identify those trees, because we still have several weeks until people will really start to see morel mushrooms. But keep this in mind. Learning how to identify trees is a skill, and it's a skill that doesn't happen overnight. It's a skill that doesn't happen just by walking through the woods. You really have to put in the time, you have to put in the effort, and you have to treat it like any other skill. If you want to become a better pianist and play better sonatas and Chopin nocturnes, then you have to practice. If you want to become a better painter and artist, then you have to practice. If you want to be able to say, this is American elm because, well, look at the bark, it's definitely American elm, or look at the twigs, definitely American elm. You have to put in the time to learn how to identify trees. Now, something else you could do right now to really improve your chances of finding morels during peak morel season is something that not a lot of people talk about, but I talk about it because it's a strategy that I implement specifically during the winter season, and that is look for indicator mushrooms in the winter season that grow in the same ecosystems that morel mushrooms grow in, and look for mushrooms that grow on the same trees that morel mushrooms are associated with. And there are a couple of those mushrooms where I live. And probably the number one indicator mushroom is the enoki mushroom. This mushroom typically grows directly on American elm trees or slippery elm trees, also grows on box elder and a few other trees. Now, I'm not saying morel mushrooms grow directly on those trees, but they grow in association with those trees. So if I'm in an area in January, February, early March, and I'm seeing enoki, then I'm gonna come back there late March, all through April, early May, and I'll probably or very likely find morels in those ecosystems. Now, the oyster mushroom is sometimes an indicator. I typically see oyster mushrooms on a variety of different woods, but I usually see it on sugar maple, other maples as well. Now, I don't typically find morels growing directly in association with maples, but maple, specifically sugar maple, where I live, typically grows with ash trees, typically grows with elm trees. And so those are ecosystems that I really want to get into to find morels in the spring season. Now, dryad saddle is an excellent indicator for morels. The downside is that it typically doesn't grow now. January, February, early March, typically starts to fruit during the spring season, so its season overlaps with morel. So if you see dryad saddle, just keep that ecosystem in mind and start looking around because you might find morels. Dryad saddle, where I live, typically grows on American elm, slippery elm, box elder, white ash, a few other trees that morels are directly associated with. So it's obviously winter, temperatures are really cold, snow on the ground, my camera batteries are dying, so I have to wrap up this video shortly. Temperatures are not optimal for finding morels today. However, there are so many things we can do from now until peak morel season to improve our chances of finding morels. Keep this in mind. Your success is connected to the amount of work you put into this. Your success is not completely dependent on the amount of work you put into this, because there are many factors outside of your control. Focus on what you can do. Keep in mind that morel mushrooms will sometimes do as they please, and they will completely surprise you and sometimes blow your mind. You don't think that morels will grow next to sassafras? Think again. Some people have found morels growing near sassafras. You don't think that morels will grow near black oak, black willow, black birch? They will, or at least it wouldn't be impossible for them to do so. Having said that, there are generalizations that can be made regarding morel mushrooms in certain areas. And if you really want to improve your chances of finding them, at least learn these generalizations, then improvise from there. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. If you want to stay in touch, please subscribe to the Learn Your Land YouTube channel and head on over to learnyourland.com and sign up for the email newsletter so that we could stay in touch. Thanks again for watching. I will see you on the next video.